I'm sorry, I just ran out of time on that video. But what I was trying to say, people, is if you're going to do fun stuff, if you're going to build motors, learn how to be safe. If you're going to start throwing great big power at a situation, a system, a car, a race car, you got to start looking at the weak links. One of the weak links in a race car is that you can blow a clutch up. You can throw it all over. So, number one, they contain that. And number two, you learn where the forces go on a clutch. And that's why I'm not trying to do some kind of an expose on the blowed up servo. We've got a famous internet personality that does a ton of cool stuff and has 1 million followers, and he's a nice guy, and he proved himself to be a real nice guy in this situation, because most people would have gone after that servo company like a rabid rat, not necessarily having any reason why they're going after it, but the gun blew up. No, he went after and tried to, and unfortunately on the internet speculation, there's very few people that have explained it, what actually happened. What actually happened is they took it from a linear equation to a non-linear equation, a three-dimensional scenario. In all your regular guns, this gas leaks out up here and there's no pressure vessel left to contain. Because obviously, if you put a pressure vessel outside of this pressure vessel, you surround it by another pressure vessel, which is essentially, I hate to call it a pipe bomb, but that's kind of what it is. When you screw an end cap on here and don't leave any relief, now all of a sudden, instead of this 50,000 PSI, remember, pounds per square inch. This is only 1/3 of a square inch. Taking all that pressure and pushing it like this and trying to rip these threads off. Well, when the servo came apart, those threads were stripped right off, the few that were holding. I'm not saying that the threads were, everything was adequate until you could have broken this case open any way you want. It didn't take any extra pressure, but you take the 50,000 PSI, which equates to 20 or 30,000 PSI, 20 or 30,000 pounds, trying to rip the system apart. These threads are more than adequate to hold it. But now, in the same way that when you lift something directly, it's 1-to-1. Takes a pound to lift this. Now you put one end down and lift like this, whoa, all of a sudden you've got leverage. You've increased the moments, you've increased the leverage. You go up here, you got way more, oh, you can lift. Now turn that whole thing in reverse. Take that 50,000 PSI that's all contained, except right here, is the direction that it's pushing, and then you take, instead of just pushing against a small area like my finger, you push against a big area of a containment surface, and all of a sudden this gets multiplied by 50 times. There's one of these situations, this less than 1/2 square inch becomes 2.5 or 3 square inches. And so instead of having 30,000 pounds trying to get out by pushing these threads off, you've got 30,000, 30,000, 30,000, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, pushing in all directions on the threads, pressuring up against the screwed on end cap. That's a matter of understanding what you've created. You've created a situation where when that 50,000 PSI is there, and maybe it's, if you do the physics on it, maybe it drops to only 40,000 PSI. But you multiply it by all the square inches. That's what I was talking about in my blow-up test, where the weather outside was frightful and I wanted to shoot a gun anyway. I had a contained vessel. The design contained it if the case ruptured for whatever reason. and that pressure got out of the case, which does happen. There's all kinds of reasons for cases to rupture, for cases to pop, for cases to blow. One that would be really hard to pop, and one that will never pop, and one that will never blow is the 50 part. Those cases can't rupture. There's no mechanism to make that case rupture, for that case head. These right here rupture because I've got big old fat cases, as you can see. They're way oversized. I'm very scrupulous with my sizing, but normal people would size this a few times and the brass would be going up this way and you'd be trimming it off and it'd be getting thinner and thinner until finally this case head would come off, and all of a sudden you got the raging lion loose, 50,000 pounds, or 80, or 70, or 45, loose inside this chamber. But that's the only place it can go. Remington, Savage, Tika, Browning, all these people understood gas control. They got pressure relief holes because they know perfectly well that if you take this case, run it up to 50,000 pounds, and then tear the case open, all that pressure escapes. When it escapes, if it just escapes into a larger pressure vessel, then that larger vessel is going to blow up, because that larger vessel can no longer contain. You take a big chunk of steel like this and you cut a hole that big through it and you put pressure inside that, and this is plenty of size to contain that pressure. Now if I number one, either make that hole a lot bigger, which makes the sidewalls thinner, or number two, I cut this way down, which makes the sidewalls thinner, I start changing those ratios dramatically. That's why, even though I felt that my screen door project was perfectly safe, nobody would, to this day, nobody will ever put their name on it. Now, there's other things at play. In my case, a good portion of this right here is a diameter that with the action on it has been proven to be safe. Over half of the case is in here. Only this much is in here where I had the barrel cut down. But let's not reference stuff that I've done in the past. What I'm trying to say here is I felt impelled to throw 30 minutes on this subject of safety and headspace and guns blowing up, because in many cases, for instance, in some of the conversation around this blow up, I heard people talking about bolt thrust. Oh, that cap on there wasn't enough. The bolt thrust, and the two little lugs on that particular gun wouldn't contain the bolt thrust. And most of the people were saying, yeah, there must have been some headspace in there because headspace increases bolt thrust, and bolt thrust came up, and that's where I decided to opine on that situation, because I'm sorry people, the maximum bolt thrust that you can get occurs when you have perfectly fitted cases with zero headspace. Headspace in and of itself isn't dangerous in the first place. Too much headspace, the gun won't fire. Too little headspace, you can't even get the cartridge into the gun. Headspace is more of it's just a set of parameters to work in. It has no safety aspects to it. Now, one thing that will dramatically increase bolt thrust is if there's residual cleaning solvent, or oil, or wax, or any of the other stupid things people do inside chambers. I don't ever recommend anything but a clean and dry chamber, because that at least keeps the bolt thrust. And then in that case, bolt thrust can actually cause your action to flex, because 100% of the 50,000 or 60,000 psi that's in here gets transmitted, where in most cases it doesn't, because the case is stuck and all you get is this trying to tear the case apart, and what's left over turns into bolt thrust. My guns shoot with pretty much 100% bolt thrust, because I shoot all of my guns tight with this actually buried tight to the bolt face. So that's almost, it's not as bad, because as things stretch, this is still locked, so it's like a spring, as opposed to if you grease it and just let it splat. It's like a water balloon. But the simple fact is, I have heard so much crap. I can't avoid it because I go on, in the case of the blown up Serbu, I can't avoid it because everybody has an opinion. Here's the problem with opinions. Opinions are like, well, everybody knows. No, I'll just say it. This is my channel. Opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one, and just about everyone stinks. That's a problem because what I'm chasing here is facts. Period. I don't care about your opinions. I don't care what you think. I don't want you to care what I think. I want us both to care about those things which are provable facts. I want to deal in, and I do deal in, facts. And if anybody watching one of my videos sees things that they disagree with, I really hope they'll comment, and I really hope that they will be right and I will be wrong, because facts in my book always override my feelings. That's why I'm a conservative. I won't call myself a Republican. I'll call myself a constitutionalist, but really what I am is a person who chases facts. Because airplanes fly through the sky safely because of physics and facts. Opinions don't enter into it. And I just felt that even though now you've probably clicked off by now because this is getting long, I just felt like being a little long, covering my bases, is better than being short and leaving somebody hanging, because this is a forum, this is a place, this is a situation where a person can, if they disagree with that which is being presented as fact, you can certainly step up in the comments and say, I don't think that's fact. You can step up in the comments and smear egg all over your face calling me names if you want. But I am driven by facts, not feelings, by physics, not by opinions. And so I'm not going to be wrong very often. I'm just throwing that out there. I will be happy to discuss any of this stuff with anybody, whether it's a blowed up Serbu 50 or whether it's the pressure signs on my little 50 fart, since we're dealing with 50s. But I'm going to be leaving off of this. It's been really fun with the 50 fart, exploring certain ways. It's been really fun working with these big guys because the prop itself is so massive that I can not illustrate, but I can physically show you things better. You know, a bolt face that's this big and a bolt that's this big, I can hold it and say, okay, here's the lug abutment surface that keeps it from that 20,000 pounds, actual pounds per square inch. Remember, this is less than a square inch, so it's less pounds. It's what I was trying to illustrate with my levers. But this is another way of expressing the fact that with fewer PSI, for instance, I shoot the 6 ppc a lot. It's tinier than this, which looks tiny now. It's really not tiny. This is a 308 case. But I mean, it's tiny. So when you're only working with that little bit, you can ramp the pressure up. I routinely shoot PPCs at PSIs approaching 80,000. I will just say approaching. I won't say that I routinely run over that 80,000 PSI or that I come close to that 80,000 PSI, or I'm just saying that, let's put it this way, 80,000 PSI is safely achievable in a 6 ppc. 80,000 PSI is not safely achievable with a bolt face this size. It's not safely achievable with a bore this size, because there's a whole lot more SIs for the P's to work against. Simple fact is that when I'm shooting my little PPC with a bore that's this diameter, 50,000 psi or 80,000 psi. That big block of steel doesn't care. It's just pecking at it. But now you go to a hole this size and throw 80,000 psi and then do the math of all the psi that are there. That's why I had to pull a string on one of my guns, is because the barrel makers told me, dude, you made it too small. All them psi's are going to PS out. Things are going to come apart. No, they all agreed that it wouldn't, but they also all agreed that they would not put their names on it. That's good enough for me. I went out and pulled the string on it. And I'll continue to check it, of course. But I can't sell that gun with that barrel on it, because that brings it into another place. Some guy fires a slap round through it. But it bothers me when thousands of people, tens of thousands of people are reading, millions perhaps. Thousands are forming opinions. Tens of thousands are forming opinions. Most are still just asking how, why. Dude went out and bought a gun, fired a factory round through it, blew up. Okay, that's bad. Dude went out and bought a Ford Escort, put pump gas in it, took it out on the road, and now he's scattered around in tiny little pieces because the car blew up. That's not good. We don't live in that world. I don't live in that world. If I was shooting a Serbu, and if I had ascertained that if a case ruptures, it's going to blow up in my face, and if I had ascertained that if it blows up in my face, it might hurt, well, then that's very simple. I won't shoot that platform. I won't drive that Pinto down the road. I won't. Back when they were talking about Pintos blowing up and gas tanks and saddle tanks on trucks, and that's important, because until you come up with, I mean, there's movies about it. One of my movies, a car goes down over the bank and it's headed toward a Pinto, and it's clumpity plumpity bumpity bumping through the weeds, and it gets down and it touches the bumper of the Pinto, and there's a brief hesitation. There's a brief minute, a brief pause, and boom! Everything blows. The pause is, of course, for effect. I said minute, it was nowhere near, it was just part of a second. But the point was, they were picking on the fact that these Pintos supposedly would blow up when they weren't supposed to. Well, turned out that that was overplayed. Turned out that the side saddle turned out, and unfortunately, in my opinion, the problem with how this particular rifle setup that blew up handles a ruptured case hasn't been addressed properly prior to now. All the guns that I'm shooting do address the case, the escaping gas. It's not escaping gas, remember. It's not about cutting your eyeball out and leaving you in dark world. It's not about a lot of things, but what it is about is letting loose the 50 or 40,000 pounds that are in there, and letting those PSI, pounds per square inch, work over a lot larger area, a lot larger square inches, and peel that cap right off, rip that cap right, strip that, or pop the pressure. Something had to pop, I contend, that had the threads not stripped off, they would have ripped off. I've blown off muzzle brakes because I designed them poorly. This is actually the muzzle end of a 50, and it's designed for a muzzle brake. Well, I was playing with pressure chambers. They're called expansion chambers in muzzle brakes. I made an expansion chamber area too big, and it actually had so many square inches to work against that it swelled that thing up, and it blew the muzzle brake off without stripping the threads. A combination of small, in this case 36, 28, 20, I would say 28 TPI. So it was a fine thread. It was an excessively oversized expansion chamber. It expansioned, and when it expansioned, it rumbled right off of here. It took me almost a year to find the muzzle brake that blew down range. Of course, I had the gun still had threads. Later, when I found the muzzle brake, it was stainless, it was undamaged, it was unrusted. You could still look inside of it, still had threads. The two threads didn't strip like poor Mark Serbu's on his blow up. It didn't rip the threads off, It just expanded enough because of the increased surface area in there. But in my case, it blew the muzzle brake off, and I learned a good lesson. That I could make all kinds of muzzle brakes that didn't have an expansion chamber, and they wouldn't try to expand the threads off of here. But as I went bigger and bigger on this area here, which is just dead air and more square inches, didn't take long. That thing opened that thing right up, ripped it off. So that's why my 50 BMG brakes are all clamped and or pinned in place. Safety is number one, but to be safe, you must have the ability to analyze the situation and find out, figure out, analyze out, math out, physics out. You must learn why features are designed the way they are. And it's generally not because they smell better or look better or taste better. Generally, the reason features are included in a system are because they work better. Putting your gas tank in the front bumper of your car, for instance, would not work well, because every time you got in a wreck, you would rupture this volume of fuel and spew it out on a hot engine and create a fire. There's a reason why putting the gas tank in the front bumper would not be a good car design. So in doing this, because I'm toying with going into a truly weird direction and experimenting somewhere. I'm not going to even broach the subject because I think the 50 fart was scary enough or opens enough questions, or the lightweight BMG is enough. I don't know how much I'm going to go into what it actually takes, maxes and minimums, to blow up. I've only blown up 3 guns, and I've got one sitting here that I should blow up, that a teacher, one of my fellow teachers, wants me to blow up, but unfortunately it's of such a design. I watched a video last night, I think, of a guy who poured 3 different rifles into buckets of concrete. Took 5-gallon buckets and stuck a barrel into them. And I do concrete. I did expect it to rupture the barrels. In all 3 cases, the guns came out unscathed, unharmed. Guns are tough. Guns are built. Guns are engineered properly, as a rule. And as long as we use them properly, which I do, we don't ignore the people that say, headspace is dangerous! Or, primers set the case forward, you gotta be careful with your primers. Or, we could go on and on. We're just not gonna. We filled our time. Thanks for listening, guys.